Welcome back to Ozarks Tonight. Well, the first presidential debate is now in the books, and our political analyst, Dr. Brian Calfano, is joining us now to break down what exactly we saw last night. And I know people are still trying to take stock of what exactly it was that we witnessed there at the debate. What are your impressions, Brian?
Oh, my goodness. Yeah, John, I think I'm breaking down the breakdown, essentially. I mean, there was very little of substance to come out of last night's debate. And I think the tell as to how bad it was when I was scrolling through my social media. And I've got a pretty broad group of social media friends, particularly on Facebook. And even some of the most ardent Trump supporters were saying, yeah, this really didn't do too good or well by us, as a country, politically, for our government, for our entire system, our way of life. And so I think overall, people may be realizing today that we've gone a little too far with this level of rancor and the kind of back and forth, almost like it's a really intense sporting event sort of thing. I mean, at some point, Americans need to realize that we are in the process of electing a president, the person who presides over the largest military in the world and the largest government in the world in terms of expenditure, in terms of our money being spent on a variety of policies for both our good and for the good of folks around the world. So this is not just some kind of position like we're voting for American Idol or Dancing with the Stars or whatever it is. And unfortunately, the entire event last night, and I'm not singling out any one particular individual, but the entire event last night was just, pick your metaphor, train wreck, dumpster fire, or whatever it happens to be. So much so that we've now seen that the Presidential Debate Commission has been forced to come out and tease that there's going to be a new set or level of regulations on how it is that the candidates are to address each other, if they're able to even address each other going forward, the amount of time they've got to be able to have rebuttals and all these sorts of things, because it was out of control. And it wasn't even really staged well, if you know what I mean. There's a way to sort of stage dramatic confrontations with your political opponent. Last night, you couldn't understand what was dramatic and what wasn't because three people at once were talking. Totally bad, even from a production value standpoint. And so I think, unfortunately, we really have a situation now, and I guess it's apropos since it's 2020, what else can go wrong, that you have millions of people who are in the process of voting already, this being the pandemic year. So you've got all those folks with absentee ballots or with those mail-in ballots, and they've already made a decision as to who they're going to vote for. Perhaps they even put the ballot in the mail, or they're about to do so, and they can't wait for the next presidential debate. And they're having to base their vote and their sense of which candidate they're going to support based on last night's performance. It's really bad. We have a big problem with our federal government selecting the president in this country, and we got to get our hands around this issue fast if we're going to make, I think, the best decision for the most good for the most people this year.
For voters last night that were undecided, that they were looking to the debate to maybe have a last-minute change of mind here or make their mind up. One way or the other, did any of these candidates, do you think, answer any questions for voters at home with how everything went?
Not in terms of policy. I mean, the one big thing early on with President Trump is that he's making a strong push to do something about prescription drug costs. You could kind of question why now. I mean, he's had the job for over 3 years, and they've been talking about replacing so-called Obamacare for at least that amount of time, but at least he's working on it. And he's talking about the executive orders that he signed and the most favored nation status of being able to get those drug prices like you can get in other countries. So that's a plus. Vice President Biden was talking about the idea of spending more money on various government projects like infrastructure and having to sort of redo the tax code to be able to afford to pay for those sorts of things. And I guess President Trump and Biden went back and forth a little bit about climate change and environmental policy and really how much of what's going on across the world can really be adequately addressed by U.S. policy alone. And so there were some substantive moments in terms of what they were talking about. You got a little bit of glimpse sort of moving forward in terms of what an administration for Biden might look like or a continuation of Trump's administration, but really not much at all. So if you're an undecided voter, to get back to your question, And there are a good number of them in places like Pennsylvania, where I am now. Biden's up by about 7 points on average. And Trump needs to try to pull back some of those soft or weak Biden supporters or those independents who are leaning Biden at this point, because he can't win the presidency without winning Pennsylvania. The problem last night, there was so little in terms of policy discussed that the sort of assessment of these candidates is going to be based on something like personality, or maybe you were turned off by a certain level of aggressiveness, or maybe you were turned off because one of the candidates really didn't represent himself very well in terms of his views on certain things. But it was more about the representing oneself and defending against an insult, as opposed to talking about the intricacies of American policy. And so, again, people fault the media for focusing on things like the horse race, and it's all about the production values, and it's a sports metaphor all the time. Well, look, we would have loved to have been able to talk about some policy last night, talking about some actual differences in terms of what these guys want to do with the country for the next 4 years, but there was scant, really, evidence of any of that to talk about, and that's really unfortunate for people trying to make up their minds right now and in the next several weeks.
And the vice presidential debate is on the horizon as well. I believe it's coming up next week. Any chance that things get, I guess, brought back to earth and it's a more civil discussion than what we saw last night?
Yeah, I know a lot of times it's a great question, John. The vice presidential debate's an afterthought. People sort of skip over it because it's not really the main event. But in terms of policy substance, next week's debate might actually be it for for this season. Because Mike Pence, I mean, his entire demeanor is much different from President Trump's. And of course, Kamala Harris, and she's not going to, I think, kind of have that go at it type attitude the way that Biden had, where you kind of had two guys in their 70s just really mad at each other. That was essentially last night's debate. I think both vice presidential nominees are actually a little classier in terms of presenting themselves on a debate stage. So I would expect there's going to actually be some discussion of policy specifics that we were supposed to get last night, and now both campaigns are scrambling, saying, okay, the vice presidents, they're going to carry the water when it comes to getting specific with the American people. And so it'll be interesting to watch. We'll actually have on Monday on Ozarks Tonight a discussion of different body language styles between Kamala Harris and Vice President Pence. So that'll be interesting to see, too, because we really haven't since 2008 had a female vice presidential candidate against a male. And ironically, it was vice presidential candidate Biden against then Alaska Governor Sarah Palin in 2008. So this will be a return to that kind of male-female dynamic that we haven't seen at the vice presidential level for about 12 years.
All right, that's what we're going to be watching for next. Our political analyst, Dr. Brian Calfano. Brian, we always appreciate your insight.
Thanks, John.
We'll be back with more Ozarks Tonight right after this short break.